Welcome to Rooted and Ready, a podcast from Annie's Project, where we share information, resources, and conversations to help women in agriculture navigate the business of farming and the life that comes along with it. When we talk about farm stress, we often focus on the farmer or the person making the financial and management decisions. But there are other people living alongside that stress, our children. Farm kids have some incredible opportunities. They learn responsibility, develop strong connections to family and community, and often understand hard work at a young age. But growing up on a farm can also mean being exposed to uncertainty, financial pressures, long work hours, difficult conversations, and the emotional ups and downs of agriculture. So, how do these experiences affect our kids? And how can we make sure we're building resilient farm kids without expecting them to carry burdens that belong to the adults? Today, I'm joined by Monica McConkey, rural behavioral health counselor and consultant, to talk about supporting the mental and emotional well being of farm and ranch youth. Monica, welcome to Rooted and Ready.
Thank you for having me. It's so good to be here.
I want to start with the big picture. What's different about growing up on a farm? Farm families often take a lot of pride in raising resilient, hardworking kids. So, what are some of the positive things about growing up on a farm and what that gives a young person?
Oh, there's so many, so many. The learning, problem solving, learning about responsibility, uh, life skills, caretaking, especially if there's livestock, but also if there's crops. How do we take care of this commodity and nurture it, raise it, what goes into it? Um, and I think another really big positive, and I would even call it a protective factor for our farm kids is often they are growing up around multiple generations of a family,
Mhm.
and sometimes extended family. So they're growing up around uncles and aunts or grandparents, sometimes great grandparents. And I mean, granted, in some of these situations, it's not all rosy and there are family dynamics at play that can be negative, but that can be a really strong protective factor to have that really strong family unit. So all of those things, good work ethic, uh, common sense, really learning about natural consequences
Mhm.
that what we do or don't do has a direct consequence on how something turns out. I would say also learning about dealing with things that are outside of our control. So, of course, on the farm, we have a number of those things with
Mhm.
weather and prices and so just having that understanding that there are things in my life that I'm not going to have control over, and I've learned at a young age how that can impact. So, I think all of those things are positives.
At the same time, farm kids experience some stressors that their non farm peers may not. What are some of the unique pressures or stressors that those farm kids growing up on farms and ranches may face? And I think you've kind of spoke about a little of these that could be positive, but they could also be have a negative side as well.
Exactly. They sure could. It could go both ways. One thing that really stands out to me is the isolation piece
Mhm.
that many of these kids are, whether they are actively involved in the operation or not, if they're living on a farm or ranch, they're probably living out of town, sometimes quite a distance out of town. And so there can be this sense of isolation. I don't see my peers. I'm not able to be involved in activities due to time constraints, getting to the school or to town. So just that isolation and the belongingness for some farm kids can really be a struggle.
Mhm.
Other things would be just exposure to, and I know we'll get into this a little deeper, but exposure to all of the stresses.
Mhm.
Like we talked about a positive being I'm faced with things or growing up on the farm faced with dynamics that are outside of our control,
Mhm.
which can be good to prepare us for the future, but also very stressful. Finances are a big stressor, not so much directly for the child, but as they are picking up their parents' stress, as they're feeling that, as they are exposed to that, finances become a big picture. So farm kids will often feel maybe guilty about asking for things or wanting to do things that cost money if the parents are verbalizing that there's already financial stress. Um, Time is another stressor. I know some farm kids that I work with are up at 4 or 5 in the morning to do chores, milk cows, and then they're coming in, get ready, jumping on the
Mhm.
school bus, heading to school. Now, is that the majority of farm kids? Probably not. But I think a lot of them, if they're active on the farm, they do have extra duties that take up their time,
Mhm.
and that can be a pressure, especially when we're talking balancing academics, friendships, family time, and the work on the farm. Uh, and lastly, one of the things that I think we don't often think about with our farm kids is the exposure to loss and grief. Not that that's a negative in every sense, but I think farm kids are exposed to more in different
Mhm.
ways. So obviously, if there's livestock, they're exposed to animal death. If they are um, in a multi-generational situation, not uncommon to be seeing great grandma and grandpa every day, grandma and grandpa every day. And then when grandma and grandpa pass away, really big impact on life versus, if we don't see grandma and grandpa but a couple times a year.
Mhm. Mhm.
But also, there's so much loss on the farm in terms of hopes and dreams, loss of crops, natural disasters, farm accidents,
Mhm.
so potential loss of functioning of a family member uh, that really are common on on farming and ranching operations that the kids are exposed to in a different way than potentially
Mhm.
agricultural kids. So those are the things that really stand out as far as pressures or stressors that set farm kids apart a bit from their peers.
I think one thing that's so different about agriculture is that home and work are often in the same place.
Mhm.
So, does that make it more difficult
So
for
true.
kids to get some distance from that farm stress?
Right. Absolutely, because they're living it where it's happening.
Hmm.
And so it's very different, a different dynamic than having a parent, even if that parent works from home, but it's an off-farm job. It's a very different setting than we're living the work. We're
Hmm.
living the business. The entire family is a part of this operation.
Hmm.
So you feel things differently. Your responsibility level is different. The pressure is different.
Hmm.
And and that is yeah, the reality on any egg operation where the kids are involved.
Let's switch a little bit and talk
Mhm.
about parental stress. When a farmer is dealing with financial pressures, and we've talked about some of those already, there's drought, low prices, or maybe animal health problem. Your president may have announced he's importing foreign beef. Uh, that stress can start spilling over into the rest of the family. And kids are often more observant than adults give them credit for being, I believe,
Absolutely.
even when adults think that they're hiding their worries. How
Yes.
much do children pick up on that stress and anxiety from their parents?
I would say to a very high degree. Josie Rodolphe, which many of you may be familiar with, she is at the University of Illinois and does a lot of research around impacts of mental health in agriculture. And one of the research studies that she most recently did was on the kind of the integration of parental stress and adolescent stress. So this was really geared toward adolescent children. And the conclusion after the research study was complete indicated a very strong association between parents and adolescents' mental health and parents' depressed mood and debt. So strong association. If a parent was struggling with mental health, if a parent is depressed, if there was debt or stress over finances, it was associated with higher levels of depression and anxiety in adolescents. And just to throw out some numbers, what she found was 60% of farm youth reported mild symptoms of depression compared to national average of 27% among
Wow.
peers. And 45% of farm youth reported symptoms of anxiety, where general population was 18 to 22%. So that study really confirms what we've been thinking
Mm-hmm.
around farm youth and and how that is connected to the functioning or the mental health or stress levels of their parents. And really, it follows the family stress model
Mm-hmm.
where there's parental stress. So a parent is experiencing emotional distress. They're having trouble thinking clearly because when we're stressed, the processing, problem solving part of our brain is diminished. There's financial problems. So their parenting is disrupted. They may not have the capacity to give their kids the attention that's needed. They may have harsh reactions. They may be snapping at them, not taking time to talk. Emotions may be ruling interactions. There may be a lack of affection. So then the outcomes of that are seen in the child's behavior and child stress levels. So we could see disrupted sleep, behavioral acting out, um, in older kids, even addictive behaviors, poor choices, things like
Mm-hmm.
that. So it's very connected with our kids, where
Mm-hmm.
they pick up on our stress and they react to our stress.
Mm-hmm.
Our stress impacts them. Doesn't mean we have to be perfect people because it's impossible, right?
Correct.
But it definitely means that it's important for us as parents to take a look at how we are functioning because that's going to have a direct impact on how our kids are functioning.
It really is an interesting balance because we don't necessarily want to hide every challenge from our children, but we also don't want to burden them with adult problems. So, how can parents talk honestly about farm challenges in an age appropriate way?
Oh, you hit the nail on the head when you said age appropriate. And I think that's often the most difficult thing because in one parent, their 8-year old is at one level, to another
Mm-hmm.
parent, their 8-year old is at a completely different level. So to throw out ages, like these are the conversations you should be able to have at these ages, it's really difficult because kids are so different
Mm-hmm.
developmentally. And so I think a lot of that, the rule should be knowing your child and understanding that their brains are not developed and are not going to process the information that you're dealing with the same way our adult brains process it.
Mm-hmm.
So when we are, throwing out information, it's just important to take a step back and just kind of see the impact on the kids. And if we can think it through before we put that information out there, that's even more important. I remember as a young kid getting home from school, getting off the bus, walking in the entryway, and mom was crying. And she said, we didn't get our operating loan. We got denied our operating loan. Well, for me as a, probably 9-year-old kid, I didn't know what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
And so in my mind, worst case scenario thinking, we're going to have to move off the farm. We're going to have to live in town. We're going to have to sell all of our animals. All of that was what was in my mind. And then we didn't really talk about it again. And then clearly, the farm is still running to this
Yeah.
day. So it worked out. But I think, just be aware that your child is not going to be able to process information the same way we do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think best scenario is that if there's things happening that it's clear, like they're hearing phone calls. Again, we're working from home.
Mm-hmm.
They're hearing phone calls, they're hearing conversations. Let's not let it live in their imagination what could be happening. Like, let's provide some clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And so it could sound something like, you guys may be hearing a lot of talk around money and finances and paying bills. And, the farm business person was here last week and we were trying to make a plan. And I just want you to know that's exactly what we're doing. We're making a plan
Mm-hmm.
for how to make our money work. And it's nothing to worry about. We are stable, we are secure. Dad and I just need to really talk through and plan how we're
Mm-hmm.
going to make this work so we can pay the bills, so we can, buy seed for next year's crop. Just
Mm-hmm.
really uh, make it simple, to the point. And kids, they will always do best. I think of it as the three S's with stability, structure, and security.
Mm-hmm.
So even if they are sensing that there's something going wrong, if we can assure them that we're still your parents, you're still going to be taken care of,
Mm-hmm.
you're still going to have a home, all of these things are going to be taken care of for you. That is very, very reassuring. Not to say that some of our farm families aren't having to have conversations about, yeah, we do need to sell the farm.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's something like, mom and dad are still here. We have another home we're going to live in. You will be taken care of. We're going to have food. You're going to be still going to school. Whatever you can reassure them with
Mm-hmm.
is important.
I really appreciate this advice that you're sharing and that approach. It makes me think of my own husband. I did not grow up on a farm. I was a town
Hmm.
kid, but my husband did, and he was a child during the 80s, which we all know that was some
Mm.
very stressful times.
Hmm.
And it's just, there was so much that happened that has really impacted him.
Yep.
And even as an adult, and kind of earlier you were talking about not wanting to ask, like for instance, he shared he didn't want to ask for Christmas presents because he knew his parents couldn't afford it. And it was just
Yeah.
very stressful times in his household. And it's has stuck with him all of these years.
Yeah.
And not speaking ill about my in-laws, everybody was doing the best
Hmm.
that they could during the time
Hmm.
and with what knowledge and what ability that they had. But I think just thinking of some of those things is why it's so important for us to be having this conversation, is
Yes.
just so we can all learn and just have the skills. And if and when we do have times that come up, that we can perhaps do better and how we're having these conversations and approaching it with our children.
Absolutely. And if there are cuts that need to be made to the family budget per
Mm-hmm.
se because of financial stress, sitting down and just explaining to the kids, like, we're all going to make some changes.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not going to be able to do XYZ this year. I'm not, whatever, going to the
Mm-hmm.
coffee shop every day to get my coffee, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it can remove some of the guilt from them too, that, oh, well, we're still going to have to pay for all your hockey equipment and that's expensive. And but more coming at it like we're all in this together. We're all
Mm-hmm.
going to make some changes. Do you have ideas of how we could cut back on spending? What are some things, but not putting that guilt on them, like they are the burden or
Mm-hmm.
they are the reason we're having financial
Mm-hmm.
problems.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about how you recognize when your child is struggling, because stress
Mm.
doesn't always look like sadness. What signs might a parent, a grandparent, a teacher, 4-H leader, FFA advisor, any other
Mhm.
trusted adult that might be listening to this, how can they tell a young person is having a difficult time?
Yeah. And this is really age dependent as well. We're going to see
Mm-hmm.
different things at different ages. Obviously, the younger the child, the things that are going to tell us there's a problem is their behavior because they don't have the words, their brain isn't developed for them to
Mm-hmm.
process through why they're feeling what they're feeling. So it's going to come out as behavior. It may come out as really like naughtiness and attention seeking behavior, but just as a rule, and I think about this all the time, even with adults, there is a function to every behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So if a person is exhibiting a behavior and maybe it doesn't make sense to us, maybe it's frustrating or annoying, or if we can take a step back and just think about what are they trying to get across? What need are they trying to have met? If you think about an infant, when they're crying, there's some basics we check, right? Are they hungry? Is their diaper needing changing? Is the temperature off?
Mm-hmm.
Are they not feeling well? It's no different in older ages. It's just as kids get older, they're able to communicate more what's going on with them. But, you know, you and I have days where something's going on with us and we don't know why, and we don't know how to communicate it.
Mm-hmm.
So for us to expect our kids to is is it's not going to happen every time. So some warning signs to ask for will be with kids. It is very behavioral typically, but things like any isolation or withdrawal, if they are just locked away in their room on their phone, not talking to anybody, that's a red flag. If they are not engaging in their friend group the way they were, if they don't want to go to 4-H or church group anymore, something's going on
Mm-hmm.
there. Um, if they're showing signs of depression or anxiety. So depression is more of the um, down feeling. So it may look like sadness. It may look like lack of motivation. To some people, it might look like laziness. It could look like poor hygiene. I just don't care anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Also symptoms of anxiety, so like excessive worry, questioning. It could be habits like they're tearing their fingernails off or biting their fingernails, or um I worked with one kiddo who had anxiety and he would pull out his eyebrows and eyelashes. It was just like an anxious behavior. uh, so really what we're looking at here is behavior change. When we know our kids, we know their personality, we know their habits, we
Mm-hmm.
know their little quirks, we know their behaviors, their moods. When we start seeing a departure from that baseline functioning that we know them as, that's an indicator that something's off, something's not right, something's going on. The hard thing with kids, of course, is they're changing so much
Mm-hmm.
over these years that there's going to be times that are very appropriate developmental times where we're seeing these things. We just need to be in tune to it. Like, how long is it going on? Are we talking about it? Like, we don't want a child to be isolating or depressed or not taking a shower or whatever for a length of time
Mm-hmm.
before we address it. We want to be on it. And that's where our mental health and us being okay plays into this, because when we're not doing well, it's much harder to be in tune
Mm-hmm.
to our kids and
Mm-hmm.
if they're doing well or not.
How can an adult open the door to a conversation without making a child feel like they're being interrogated?
Hmm,
I feel like I
that's a
run
good
into this with
question.
with my kids just asking them like, "How was school today?"
Yeah,
And
that's right. If you're noticing things that are a little off, or majorly off, one way to approach it is just by saying, I've been noticing XYZ lately.
mhm,
So non-judgmental, not in trouble, not condescending, but just I've noticed you've been, you've not been eating with us at supper.
mhm,
I've noticed that you've been missing a lot of practice lately. What's happening?
mhm,
Make it an open-ended question so they can't get by with a yes or no, and try your best to engage them in conversation. Um, it's much easier, of course, if you have a good relationship with your child and you can, you know, it comes more naturally than if there's been conflict and all of a sudden I'm worried and I'm trying to get them to talk to me.
mhm,
So it it can be more difficult, obviously, if there's some contention between the two of you. I'm thinking about like adolescence.
mhm.
Um, so working on good relationships with your kids starts like day one, right? Starts at birth when we want to just know them and be able to meet their needs and be able to help them make good decisions, discipline, all of the things. It really starts on day one.
I'd like to give parents, our listeners, some practical tools to help support our farm youth. What are a few things that farm families can intentionally do to help children cope with stressful seasons on the farm?
Yeah. Communication is really big. So calm, rational communication. Uh, when emotion is high, when there's a lot of yelling, when there's stress, when there's time crunches, that doesn't feel good for anybody. So even if there can be one like check-in time during, maybe we do it at supper when we're all eating
Mhm,
together, or maybe it's on a Sunday evening before everybody's heading off Monday morning to what they have going on. But there's a check-in time where we're preparing for what's coming, we're talking about people's plans, we're letting them know that this is, if they're younger, this is the plan for the week, this is where mom and dad are going to be, this is our plans that we made for you. This is the plans that we made for meals. Especially heading into those busy times. It's like, going back to the three S's: stability, structure, security. What can we communicate them and prepare in advance so that when those really busy times hit, it doesn't feel like pure chaos? Like when harvest
mhm,
or chopping or state fair, when those times hit, like we've thought about it, we've prepared for it in advance. Doesn't mean it's going to be stress free, but it means that we have bases covered as far as having, for sure, basic needs met.
mhm,
So we're preparing for getting enough sleep at night. We're preparing for eating meals every day. We're preparing for having plenty of water on hand. We're preparing for who's going to be taking care of them, who's going to be picking them up at school. Um, so communication is big. I would say another practical tool is more for the parents than for the kids is how do we calm? Like when we are feeling amped up, when we're feeling the stress, when we're feeling our emotions taking over, when we're feeling the rush of it all, how can we calm before we go into parenting or conversation
mhm,
with our kids? And different things work for us in different ways. For some people, it's like I'm just going to pause and take some slow deep breaths so I can emotionally regulate. I think of it like the image is a teeter-totter or a
mhm,
seesaw. When our emotions are elevated, our ability to think, process, problem solve very diminished.
mhm,
And if we enter a conversation like that, very keyed up, amped up, uh, our kids are going to respond to that. And
Mhm.
they're often going to come to our level, and then we match their level. And then
Mhm.
pretty soon everybody's very emotionally elevated.
Yeah.
So the more we as parents can have a level teeter totter, calm and rational,
Mhm.
as we're engaging our kids in conversation, the better off it's going to go. So, what is that for you? Is it in the moment, I'm just going to take some slow, deep breaths? Is it I need to set some things to the side to really think through and problem solve later? Like, this cannot be top of mind with me right now when I'm dealing with kids.
Mhm.
Is it I really need some help? I need some childcare. I need somebody to come and watch the kids for a few hours so I can get my feet under me and get through the things I need to get through.
Mhm.
Uh, calming for some people is going for a walk. It's just taking a moment to really tune into their senses, their five senses. So give some thought of what is that for you and how can you implement it so that your teeter-totters level, you're emotionally regulated, you're calm and rational, because you're going to be able to deal with those stressful times and your kids in a much better way
Mhm.
than if you're elevated. Because then they're going to be elevated and it's going to go from there.
Mhm. That segues really nicely into this next question. How important is it for them, for our kids, to see adults in their lives actually practicing healthy stress
Mm.
management?
It is super important. We model.
Mhm.
It's so interesting. I just talked to a farm family member this past week. And one of the problems on the farm is communication because there's just a whole lot of yelling. Two siblings are taking over the farm
Okay.
and constant yelling at each other.
Mhm.
And we kept talking, and surprise, surprise, it turns out that mom and dad were constantly yelling at each other and the kids.
Mm.
And I'm guessing if they went back to grandma and grandpa and great grandma and grandpa,
Yeah.
that has been the what has been modeled
Mhm.
is that when we are upset about something or when something's not going our way, our mode of conversation is yelling. And that's how children learn.
Mm.
And so if we're seeing something in our kids that we don't especially love, it's important to look in the mirror. Like,
Mhm.
are we exhibiting that same impatience, that same volatility,
Mhm.
the same communication breakdown where we're letting the emotion take over?
Mhm.
So that's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to look in the mirror and see ourselves or our traits that we're not exceptionally proud of
Mhm.
coming through with our kids. Um, but that doesn't mean I mean, we can break generational patterns anytime.
Mhm.
And it's so exciting to see that happening, that people don't like the way maybe communication patterns or stress, coping with stress was happening when they were growing up. So they're like, I am intentionally going to change this
Mhm.
as I'm raising my family. And it's never too late to do that. It's never too late to step back and say, I'm seeing patterns repeat, and I don't want that to repeat for my kids. Like, I want to break this generational um, negative coping
Mhm.
or uh, ineffective communication.
Mhm.
And it's an amazing thing to watch happen. I see it all the time with the folks I work with. And so, yes, very important to know that we are modeling to our kids how to solve problems,
Mhm.
how to communicate with other people, how to communicate with other people we don't especially like working with. That is all being modeled and they're taking it in from a really young age.
Mhm.
So if it's not something that you love in a sense, the way you're handling it, it can be changed. You can change it.
I think that will be inspiring for our listeners, to know that there it's never too late, that there's always time to, if you recognize something, to stop and to do better and model it better for your children.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I talk to people who will say my spouse has the same characteristics as his parents.
Mm-hmm.
And it's negative, it's you know, unhealthy coping, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is. And I don't want my kids to pick up on that same pattern. And so even if the pattern somewhat is external to you, you have a part in breaking it. Like you can talk to the spouse, you can help your kids manage emotions in a
Mm-hmm.
healthy way, you can help them learn coping strategies, you can help them learn that when emotions are high, we're going to take some time, calm down, use our words.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so just because the patterns might be external to you, you can still have a big impact in changing them for the positive.
Mm-hmm. At what point should a parent consider seeking additional or professional support for their child?
That's a really good question. Because again, with a lot of kids, things are very developmentally normal, right? They go through these stages and it's a tough stage and we're going to get on the other side of it. But I would say there are some key things to really watch for. And one is it going on? Is whatever the concern is, has it been going on for a while? And for a kid, I don't mean a year. That's way too
Mm-hmm.
long. I'm talking a couple months, depending on what it is. Is there some pattern to it? Does it seem to not be resolving? Does it seem to be really impacting them? So we're seeing signs of anxiety, depression. Um, I would absolutely seek support
Mm-hmm.
at that time. Support needs to be sought immediately if there's any verbiage around suicide, if you see anything that they're writing or doodling that would indicate suicide or posting on social media. Also self-harm.
Mm-hmm.
Many times self-harm or we'll call it like self-mutilation, cutting. Many times that's not about suicide, but it truly is about emotional pain. And so that's another time we don't want to wait for it to resolve. Like we
Mm-hmm.
want to seek help. Um, any development of addictive behaviors, if it seems like they are participating in a behavior that helps control their mood,
Mm-hmm.
that's concerning. The number one thing for our kids is going to be electronics, technology. That helps them control mood because and it's the same with us. When we sit down and scroll and it's a little bit of a like relax, we can just
Mm-hmm.
zone out. um, it can quickly become an addictive behavior because it's feeding our brain
Mm-hmm.
those dopamine
Mm-hmm.
hits. Happens to our kids all the time. So as a parent, really consciously watching use of electronics and screen time
Mm-hmm.
is so important. It can be a damaging addiction, just like other more traditional
Mm-hmm.
addictions that we think about. So, and one giveaway with this is if there are emotional outbursts when the electronics are taken away, or it's time to shut them off, that probably means they need a break. Uh, because they're becoming emotionally reactive to needing to be apart from that.
Mm-hmm.
Other addictive behaviors, of course, are, alcohol use, substance use,
Mm-hmm.
gambling, pornography, um, all provide that dopamine hit to the brain and can easily become a go-to for stress management or for coping if we don't have other good coping strategies available to us or if we never learn them. So those are times I would not wait. I would get uh, help for your child. Many school districts now have school-based mental health services that you can tap into, um, and that's a place to start.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they won't be the fit for your child, but they can be a resource to help you find
Mm-hmm.
someone else.
I I think it's really important to seek out those additional services if you think that there is an issue. I really appreciate now that I think the attitudes about mental health and seeking out support for that, I think that has vastly changed since, well, when I was growing up. I think that people are now seeing that it's no different than a medical doctor. You know, you go to a doctor
Yes,
for if you're feeling sick within your body, but I mean, I think seeking out that someone to talk to about stresses and mental issues is really important as well. A short story: a few
absolutely.
years ago, my daughter, she's very young at the time, 7, 8, 9. I started seeing some anxiety issues that came
Hmm.
up, and we ended up finding a counselor for her to talk to because
Hmm.
we went the school routes, and even, just
Hmm.
talking to her, the school counselor, it just wasn't helping. And it came about when we finally kind of figured out what the core issue was. She was having extreme like separation anxiety
Yes,
with
from
me in
you.
particular.
Yes.
But my sister-in-law had passed away. COVID had happened, and then my sister-in-law had
Mm.
passed away unexpectedly the following year. And she was very close with us. She was single, did not have
Mm.
kids, so she spent a lot of time with our family. And my daughter was
Yeah.
just terrified that something was going to happen to me as well.
Sure.
And so all of that it's grief, being scared, it
Yep.
just all manifested into this, you know, just anxiousness, and it was
Yes.
very hard for my husband and I. It was very scary for us at times because you wonder, is this something, at first you're like, oh, will she grow out of this? Is this just a stage? But
Right.
it became apparent that this was a little something more. But, we found somebody who was wonderful with her, taught her
Oh,
some
good.
coping skills that for a long time she'd even repeat to me. Or I
Hmm.
heard her talking to my mom one day, like, Greta, if you worry, this is what I do. I have a worry box. And she was,
Oh,
telling
this is
my mom. It
great.
was so good. But, that was several years ago now, and she
Mhm.
is doing great now. We don't see any of those
Amazing.
issues. And she even says sometimes if she does get stressed, she has those tools to fall back
Yes.
on. So for any of our listeners, I mean, please
Yep.
don't hesitate if you think that your child needs to talk to somebody else, just reach out and
Yes.
find that person that can help them.
Absolutely. And if it doesn't work with the first person, don't stop. You know,
Exactly.
we
Yes.
wouldn't stop if we brought our child into a medical
Mm-hmm.
professional and we didn't feel like they either heard us or had the correct diagnosis. We wouldn't stop. We would go to someone else and someone
Mm-hmm.
else and someone else. It's no different with a mental health or behavioral health professional that sometimes it clicks and sometimes it doesn't. So don't stop, don't give
Yes.
up just because the first interaction
Mm-hmm.
isn't what you need it to be.
Yeah, that's a great point. We hear the word resilience a lot in agriculture. And in fact, in this podcast, we talk about resilience quite a bit. What does healthy resilience actually look like in a child or teenager?
That's a good question. To me, it looks like being able to utilize positive coping strategies
Mm-hmm.
to be able to communicate and talk about emotional upset versus simply behavioral acting out. So, resilience is an interesting thing. Resilience comes from going through difficult things.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it doesn't mean we are prevented from going through difficult things. It means that we've gone through difficult things and we've learned. We've learned coping strategies, we've learned skills, we've learned about support people, we've learned about ourselves. And then we can apply those things we've learned when life hits us with other things.
Mhm.
That's like resilience. And so not that we ever want our kids to go through hard things, but they're going to.
Mhm.
They're going to. And so the more we can help them learn ahead of time or through the difficult thing how to cope well. These are your supports. This is how we build protective factors around ourselves. The better positive resilience they're going to build.
Mm.
So, yeah, to me, really good resilience in a child or teenager does. It means they're utilizing healthy coping strategies. They're seeking help. They're seeking people to talk things through with.
Mhm.
That's a huge positive. Resilience does not mean we're doing it on our own or we're some, you know, indestructible person who can take all this on and we're fine. It means we're using our resources. We're able to talk and communicate. So to me, that's what resilience for a kiddo looks like.
If a parent listening today realizes my family has been under a lot of stress and I think my kids are feeling it, what's one thing you would encourage them to do this week?
I would say work on yourself.
Mm.
Like, how are you managing the stress?
Mhm.
Um, how are you leveling your teeter-totter? So becoming like calm and rational, emotionally regulated, keeping your thinking brain turned on. I think that's the first step.
Mhm.
So kind of getting a handle on it yourself. And then a second step would be, okay, if I notice my kids are feeling the stress, we need to sit down and talk. Like we need to sit down and talk. And maybe it's a couple different conversations if you have kids that are different ages
Mm.
or at different developmental
Mhm.
levels. Maybe we're not all together in the same room having the same conversation. It might be a couple different conversations.
Monica, this work is also connected to your own business, Eyes on the Horizon Consulting. Can you just share a little bit of what kind of services or support that you provide and who you typically work with?
Yeah, so I'm a licensed professional counselor, licensed in the state of Minnesota,
Mhm.
and I have a contract with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. In Minnesota, we have legislatively funded farm counselors, and I'm honored to be one of them.
Mhm.
So every day I'm meeting with farmers, ranchers, their family members, spouses, uh, either in person on the farm or over Zoom or over
Mhm.
the phone, and providing counseling and support on a number of issues. And so a lot of what we talked about today with farm youth is exactly the things that I'm hearing from our farm youth and the things that we work on, like developing good calming strategies and coping strategies and relaxation skills. So yes, I do a lot of counseling with egg providers, egg producers, and I do a lot of speaking and training around the country on rural mental health, um, stress in agriculture, agricultural mental health, those types of things.
I'd like to end this conversation by giving listeners something to carry with them. So, if you could give every farm or ranch parent one piece of advice for raising healthy, resilient kids while navigating the stresses of agriculture, what would it be?
It would absolutely be to work on yourself, to work on your coping strategies, to work on how you calm. Um, because in essence, our kids, their brains are developing. Our brain already developed,
Mhm.
right? So the last part of their brain to develop is the part of the brain that thinks, processes, problem solves, makes decisions. The first part of their brain to develop is the emotional center.
Mhm.
They say research says that the thinking processing part of our brains don't fully develop until we're 26, which is I think farm kids are ahead of that trajectory myself just because they're in positions where they have to
Have
they have to
to.
kind of flex that
Yes.
muscle more. But I will say my oldest son just turned 26 this year, and I couldn't be more thrilled because I think it's working for him now. But up until then, when we're raising our kids, we as parents are, in essence, that part of their brain.
Hmm.
Ours is fully developed, theirs is not. So we have to come along next to them and be able to think, process, problem solve, be rational. If we are not doing that, they're certainly not going to do it.
Hmm.
And so the more we can learn how to manage our emotions, problem solve instead of worry, the better it's going to be for our kids. And then just those three S's, the more we can offer and promote stability, structure, and security, the more our kids are going to feel safe and protected.
Well, Monica, thank you so much for joining us and helping us think not only about how we manage stress ourselves, but about how that stress can ripple through our families. Our farm kids are learning from us every day. They're learning how we work, how we solve problems, how we handle uncertainty, and how we respond when life gets hard. Supporting them doesn't mean removing every challenge. It means giving them the relationships, tools, and reassurance they need to navigate those challenges in a healthy way. And sometimes one of the most important lessons we can teach the next generation is that being strong doesn't mean carrying everything alone. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Rooted and Ready, a podcast from Annie's Project. Until next time, stay rooted, stay ready, and remember, you don't have to navigate the business or life of agriculture alone.